Your champagne, sir. Garrett Whitmore III didn't even grant her the dignity of a glance. Did I ask for your opinion? He raised a single hand, a quiet gesture that dismissed her as one would a dog. A cruel smirk played across his face as he turned back to his billionaire companions. Seeing as this young woman is so adept with a tray, he drawled, perhaps she can offer some financial counsel. His eyes went cold as steel. I'm managing a $50 million fund, sweetheart. What's your advice? I should open an account at the welfare office? His entire table erupted in derisive laughter. He then dangled a $100 bill just inches from her face. Here's your retainer, he sneered. School a billionaire on the nuances of money. A woman adorned in pearls leaned in and whispered, these types simply don't understand their station. Felicia Turner stood rooted to the spot. A black woman in a cheap uniform, utterly alone and encircled by a pack of white billionaires. Not a single person spoke up for her. But here was the truth none of them could possibly fathom. In precisely 15 minutes, this black girl would expose a $50 million fraud scheme on live television. And as for Garrett Whitmore, he was about to lose everything. The Meridian Club was hardly just a restaurant. It was a cathedral of capital, poised on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, where the elevator itself demanded a membership card that cost more annually than most Americans earned. Each Saturday morning, the exact same ritual played out. Titans of Wall Street would convene for what they dubbed a power brunch. 3 hours of fine champagne, lobster omelets, and backroom deals that could rattle the markets. The tables were cloaked in immaculate white linen. The cutlery was solid silver, and the staff glided about like phantoms, trained to be visible only when summoned, and silent at all times. An enormous screen mounted on the wall broadcasted a live feed from CNBC. Stock tickers scrolled in a relentless stream, a constant affirmation that even as these men dined, their wealth was busy generating more wealth. This entire domain was Garrett Whitmore's kingdom. By the age of 58, Garrett Whitmore III had sculpted Whitmore Capital into a $12 billion hedge fund. Forbes magazine hailed him as a financial genius. CNBC crowned him a market oracle. He simply considered himself inevitable. But the people whose lives he had shattered had entirely different names for him. He had built a reputation on hostile takeovers, acquiring vulnerable companies, burying them under mountains of debt, bleeding them of millions in fees, and then abandoning them to collapse. Pension funds were plundered, small businesses were bankrupted, and thousands of jobs vanished, all of which was perfectly legal, immensely profitable, and carried out without a shred of conscience. His personal catchphrase was echoed so often, it became a dark piece of gallows humor on Wall Street. Money is the only language that speaks with any authority. Today, Garrett commanded Table 7, flanked by 6 associates, 2 fund managers who laughed sycophantically at every quip, a tech CEO angling for an investment, a senator's wife soliciting donations, and her husband's aide, Bradley, who was diligently taking notes, along with Caroline Hayes, a 42-year-old fund manager who was the only one present who ever showed a flicker of discomfort at Garrett's brand of cruelty. Garrett's topic of the day was his latest fixation, a company called Nexus Technologies. I am telling you, he pronounced, making a point with his champagne flute, Nexus is the next Amazon. I declared it on CNBC just last week. You need to put every cent you have behind it. What he deliberately omitted, the one truth he would never reveal, was the real story. Garrett knew perfectly well that Nexus was rotten to its core. He'd personally reviewed the internal reports. The SEC was already circling. The company's accounting was a fiction, its revenue streams were fake, and its implosion was a mathematical certainty. Yet Garrett was unconcerned because he was meticulously executing a pump-and-dump scheme. Every time he appeared on television to sing Nexus's praises, the stock would leap 3 to 5%. And each time it leaped, Whitmore Capital was quietly selling off its shares, $52 million worth over the past 8 months. He was cashing out his entire position while telling the whole world to buy in. By the time Nexus finally disintegrated, Garrett would be immeasurably richer. Everyone who had placed their trust in him would be left with nothing. That was the man waving a $100 bill in Felicia Turner's face. And as for Felicia, to everyone else in that dining room, she was functionally invisible. Just one more black woman in a black uniform, clearing away plates and refilling water glasses. 28 years old, with tired eyes and a profound silence about her. Nobody knew her background. Nobody was interested enough to ask. But Felicia Turner was holding secrets that would have absolutely staggered every person in that room. 3 years earlier, she had graduated from Columbia Business School, finishing in the top 5% of her class. She was immediately recruited by Goldman Sachs to be a junior analyst, with a focus on risk assessment and the detection of fraud. Her supervisors described her as exceptional. Her professional future appeared to have no ceiling. Then, her mother had a stroke. Ruth Turner, age 58, the woman who had raised Felicia all on her own after her father walked out, collapsed one evening inside their Harlem apartment. The stroke left her partially paralyzed, unable to hold a job, and in need of continuous, around-the-clock care. The doctors explained that rehabilitation would be $15,000 a month. Felicia had no savings, no family fortune, and no safety net to fall back on. She was faced with an agonizing choice: hold on to her career or save her mother. She chose her mother. Felicia handed in her resignation at Goldman Sachs. She sold everything she owned. She moved back to Harlem, into a tiny apartment where a hospital bed now occupied the living room, and she took on the role of a full-time caregiver. Within 6 months, her former professional contacts had stopped taking her calls. Within a year, it was as if she had never even existed on Wall Street. That world doesn't pause for anyone, especially not for a young black woman with a gap in her resume and no connections left to leverage. And so, waiting tables became Felicia's new reality. She started at a gritty Bronx diner, then a steakhouse in Midtown, before finally, 2 years ago, securing a position at the Meridian Club, home to the biggest tips in the city if you could endure the clientele. She could more than endure it. She had perfected the art of making herself invisible, of absorbing insults like a sponge, of maintaining a placid smile while men like Garrett Whitmore treated her like part of the furniture. But her real education began after her mother went to sleep each night and Felicia opened her laptop. She devoured earnings reports, deconstructed SEC filings, and analyzed the subtle choreography of market movements. In those quiet hours, she felt like the woman she used to be, before her entire world had come undone. And she studied the men at the Meridian Club with forensic intensity, especially Garrett Whitmore. For 2 full years, his Saturday night table had been her station. She'd been a silent witness to his bragging about deals, had overheard his investment advice to friends, and had observed him take hushed, urgent phone calls about a company called Nexus Technologies. 6 months ago, her mental notes had become a detailed ledger. 3 months ago, the patterns began to emerge. The calculated television appearances, the subsequent stock surges, and the quiet, methodical sell-offs that always followed. 2 months ago, she pulled Nexus's public filings and found exactly what she'd been hunting for, tucked away in the footnotes that everyone else on Wall Street had ignored. Felicia Turner knew precisely what Garrett Whitmore was up to. She was merely waiting for the perfect moment to act. In that dining room, however, one other person was aware of Felicia's secret. Harold Brennan sat by himself in a corner booth, slowly sipping a cup of coffee. At 72 years old, with his white hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, he looked like anyone's grandfather. He was, in truth, one of the most brilliant financial minds in America, having dedicated 30 years of his life as a professor at NYU's Stern School of Business. He had been a consultant for the Federal Reserve and had mentored an entire generation of titans on Wall Street. Now in retirement, he frequented the Meridian Club every Saturday, drawn by the tranquility, the stimulating conversations he had with a particular waitress, whose understanding of the markets dwarfed that of his most promising former students. Harold had recognized Felicia's exceptional talent months ago, watching her use salt shakers and folded napkins to explain complex financial instruments. He'd challenged her with hypotheticals that would stump most MBA candidates, and she'd navigated every one flawlessly. He had asked her once why she was working there. She simply smiled and replied, "Sometimes the best view of the game is from the sidelines." Harold didn't press the issue. He understood that this remarkable woman was playing a long game. And right now, as he watched Garrett Whitmore humiliate her in front of the whole restaurant, Harold Brennan sensed that the game was about to begin. The laughter erupting from Garrett's table slowly died down, like ripples vanishing on the surface of still water. Felicia hadn't flinched or uttered a sound. She just stood there, holding the champagne, her expression completely unreadable. He reveled in that, her silent submission. It affirmed his entire worldview about the natural order of things. "No?" he sneered, leaning back with a grin. "Nothing at all? Cat got your tongue?" He spread his arms wide, playing to his captive audience. "Come on, I'll even make it easy for you. A simple question. Should I be buying stocks or bonds right now? Surely even you can manage an answer to that." For the first time in 2 years, Felicia truly looked at him, not as a server to a guest, but as a predator to her prey. Then she spoke. "Neither."
Garrett blinked.
"Excuse me?" "You asked for my advice," she replied, her voice eerily calm and steady. "You should sell." Garrett snorted. "Sell? Sell what?" "Nexus Technologies. All of it. Before Tuesday." The table fell silent. Garrett had just spent the week on national television telling millions of viewers to buy Nexus. He had staked his entire public reputation on it, and now this waitress, his waitress, was telling him to sell. For a second, he was too shocked to speak. Then his face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Nexus's Q3 report shows significant revenue recognition irregularities, Felicia stated, her voice shifting, becoming sharper and more clinical. Their accounts receivable shot up 340%, while revenue only increased by 12%. That is textbook channel stuffing. And the SEC filing from last month includes a footnote about an ongoing internal review. That's corporate code for a federal investigation. There was dead silence. The fund managers at his table exchanged nervous glances. Caroline Hayes carefully set down her fork. That wasn't the vocabulary of a waitress. That was the language of Wall Street. Garrett's face flushed a deep red. "You're reading headlines and pretending you understand them." "I'm reading 10K filings," Felicia replied coolly. "There's a difference." A palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. Conversations at the surrounding tables had ceased. Members of the kitchen staff were now peering out from the service window. Everyone was watching. Garrett pushed his chair back, its legs scraping loudly on the marble floor as he slowly rose. "All right," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You think you're so smart? Let's make this interesting." He jabbed a finger toward the large screen on the wall, where Nexus's stock price was displayed in glowing green letters. $142.50. Nexus is going to clear 150 by Friday. When I'm right, you will get up on that chair. He gestured with his chin at the seat behind her and announced to the entire room his apology for her public waste of our time. His companions managed a few nervous chuckles. "But if you happen to be right," Garrett smirked, utterly convinced she couldn't be, "I'll personally write a check for $100,000 to any charity you choose, and I'll do it on camera. Is it a deal?" The air in the room went still. Felicia's colleague Derek, watching from near the kitchen entryway, whispered frantically, "Felicia, don't do this." But Felicia's attention wasn't on Derek. Her gaze was locked on Garrett Whitmore, the man who for 2 years had made a point of treating her like she was subhuman. The man who thought his wealth made him invincible, who had no clue she'd been observing him like a biologist studying a specimen. "Let's make it financial literacy programs," she said, her voice low and steady. For underserved communities, and you'll announce it yourself on CNBC. Garrett's smile broadened into a predatory grin. Done. They didn't shake on it. There was no need. Every single person in that restaurant had just become a witness to their contract. And Felicia Turner, the server nobody ever saw, had just placed the single most dangerous wager of her entire life. Felicia pushed through the kitchen doors, her hands shaking almost imperceptibly. She braced herself against a cold, steel counter, shut her eyes, and willed the chaotic sounds of the dining room to disappear. What had she possibly just done? For 2 years she had maintained her silence. For 2 years she had swallowed his contempt, stayed invisible, and waited. Now, in less than 60 seconds, she had torched it all in a public spectacle with one of the most powerful players in the financial world. But as the frantic rhythm of her heart started to slow, a realization dawned on Felicia. She felt no regret. It was impossible to. This moment hadn't been building for just 2 years. Its foundation was much older. Her mind spooled backward to a different kitchen in a different life. Suddenly, she was 25 years old again, seated in a glass-walled boardroom at Goldman Sachs, surrounded by 12 other analysts at a mahogany table as the managing director walked them through quarterly risk assessments, numbers streaming across the screens like a river. And in that river of data, she saw it, a fundamental flaw in their correlation model that had gone completely unnoticed. She raised a hand, her voice trembling just a bit as she spoke. Sir, the correlation assumptions fail to account for tail risk in emerging markets. If we properly adjust for it, our exposure is actually 3 times higher than the projection shows. The room was suddenly devoid of sound. 12 sets of eyes turned to her. Some were annoyed, others skeptical, and a few were simply lost. The managing director stared at her for a long, heavy moment, then shifted his gaze back to the screen. She's right, he said at last. Fix it. That was the instant Felicia knew she belonged. She was good at this work, exceptionally good. She could perceive patterns others were blind to, absorb footnotes others breezed past, and connect dots that others didn't know were on the same map. For one incredible year, she was certain she had made it. And then came the call. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, she was still at her desk, drowning in a sea of spreadsheets. Felicia, this is Mount Sinai Hospital. We've admitted your mother. She suffered a stroke. The hours that followed became a sickening blur, harsh fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Her mother's face, half frozen and paralyzed, her eyes swimming with fear. The doctor's words were clinical, and they were devastating. She is going to need 24-hour care, rehabilitation, physical therapy, and speech therapy. Without a comprehensive insurance plan, you are looking at a minimum of $15,000 per month. Felicia had $4,000 in her savings account, no family to ask for help, and no safety net whatsoever. She sat vigil at her mother's bedside that night, holding her hand and listening to the steady beeping of the monitors. Ruth Turner had brought her up alone, working double shifts as a hotel housekeeper to fund Felicia's education. She had never complained, never requested a thing, and never stopped believing her daughter was meant for extraordinary things. And now, Ruth had no voice, could barely move a muscle, and could only communicate with eyes that screamed, "I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Felicia made her choice before the sun rose. She resigned from Goldman Sachs that week, sold her apartment, moved back into her childhood home in Harlem, and simply vanished. That was 3 years in the past. 3 years of feeding her mother, of bathing her, of going through physical therapy motions in their tiny living room. 3 years of working overnight shifts at diners, dealing with rude customers and aching feet, and existing in a state of perpetual exhaustion. It was 3 years of watching her former peers get promotions, get married, and acquire everything she had once taken for granted as her future. But Felicia's real work never stopped. Every single night after Ruth drifted off to sleep, she would open her laptop to dissect earnings reports and analyze the markets. It was the only ritual that kept her sane, the only thread that connected her to the person she once was. And that was how she found the job at the Meridian Club. In the beginning, it was purely for the money. The tips were better, the clientele wealthier, and it was enough to afford her mother's medications. But after a while, she started to truly listen. The men at these tables talked with reckless abandon, so arrogant they acted as if the serving staff was invisible. They spoke of insider trading, of manipulation plots, of blatant fraud. And the absolute worst of them all was Garrett Whitmore. Felicia started compiling a dossier, tracking patterns, digging through public filings, and connecting every whisper she overheard. 6 months ago, she'd finally understood Garrett's game with Nexus Technologies. 3 months ago, she located the smoking gun, buried deep within the fine print of an SEC footnote. A month ago, she established a line of communication with a New York Times journalist named Sarah Wade. And just now, Garrett Whitmore had served up the very opening she had been praying for. He'd asked for her financial opinion, and she was about to give him one he'd never forget. Felicia's eyes opened. She pushed herself away from the counter and smoothed her uniform. The trembling in her hands had vanished. She strode back into the dining room. As she passed the kitchen, Derek grabbed her arm. "Have you lost your mind?" he hissed. "That man is Garrett Whitmore. He ruins people for sport." "What are you doing?" Felicia calmly pried his hand off. "He solicited my financial advice. I'm going to provide it." "Felicia, I need you to cover my tables for 15 minutes, okay?" Derek just stared, as if seeing her for the first time, but he gave a slow nod. From her apron, Felicia withdrew a small, worn notebook, its pages dog-eared and crammed with 2 years of careful observation. She then produced several neatly folded documents, printouts of SEC filings she'd acquired that very morning. She had been carrying this arsenal for weeks, waiting for this precise opportunity. Felicia crossed the restaurant floor, not heading toward Garrett's table to take an order, but to deliver a presentation. The chatter around her seemed to dissolve. Patrons glanced up from their meals. The waitstaff paused, frozen in motion. Garrett spotted her coming, and a smirk spread across his face. "Ah, look who it is. The financial advisor returns." He made a grand gesture to his companions. "Everyone, listen up. We're all about to receive an education." A few of them chuckled nervously. Felicia came to a halt at the edge of his table. She didn't offer a smile. She didn't even flinch. When her voice emerged, it had completely transformed. The soft, deferential tone of a server was gone. This was the voice she once wielded in the conference rooms at Goldman Sachs. "Mr. Whitmore, you asked for my advice. Allow me to provide a proper analysis." "By all means." Garrett leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "Enlighten us, sweetheart." Felicia let the condescension roll right off her. She'd endured far worse. Much, much worse. "Nexus Technologies," she began, her tone clinical. "Ticker symbol NXT. Current market cap of $8.2 billion. You've been vocally bullish on the company since the second quarter. You have made 17 television appearances recommending the stock. Each of those appearances corresponds with a 3 to 5% surge in its price." The smirk on Garrett's face began to fade. "Impressive memory," he said. "So you can count. What's the point?" Felicia unfolded one of the papers and placed it firmly on the table. "Page 43 of their most recent 10Q filing. Please direct your attention to footnote 12. Her finger tapped a highlighted sentence. I quote, "The company is cooperating with an informal SEC inquiry regarding revenue recognition practices." End quote. Caroline Hayes, one of the associates, leaned in with a frown. "Wait a second, my team didn't flag that in our analysis." "Almost no one reads the footnotes," Felicia said. "That's by design." Garrett's jaw tightened. "A single footnote means nothing." "You're correct," Felicia conceded. "So, let's look at 3 other items." She raised a single finger. "First, accounts receivable. Nexus is reporting that their accounts receivable climbed 340% year over year, while their revenue only increased by 12%. She let the numbers hang in the air. "Do you know what that suggests?" They are booking sales that have not actually been paid for. The practice is known as channel stuffing. They ship product to distributors who never asked for it, recognize it as revenue, then take it all back after the quarter closes. It is one of the oldest accounting tricks in the book. Anxious glances were exchanged among the fund managers at the table. Felicia raised a second finger. Second, insider selling. Nexus's chief financial officer sold $12 million in stock last month via a 10b5-1 plan. These plans are supposed to be filed months ahead of time to avoid any accusations of insider trading. But his was put on file just 46 days before the transaction. The legal minimum is 45 days. She looked Garrett dead in the eye. When a CFO liquidates that much stock that quickly, it means only one thing. He knows something catastrophic is coming, and he's racing for the exits. Caroline was already typing frantically into her phone. Felicia raised a third finger. And third, the auditors. Peterson and Associates has served as Nexus's external auditor for 11 years. Last quarter, they quietly resigned. There was no announcement, no explanation. They just walked away. She let that fact settle for a long moment. Auditors do not resign from an $8 billion client unless they have uncovered something they refuse to attach their name to. Something like systemic fraud. The table was completely silent. One of the fund managers, a man who had been laughing the loudest at Garrett's jokes, had turned a ghostly white. "Holy shit," he breathed. "I have 20 million in Nexus." Garrett's face had become a shade of crimson. A thick vein throbbed at his temple. "This is absurd," he snarled. "The woman serves coffee. She's parroting nonsense she read on some fringe blog and acting like a guru." Felicia met his gaze with unnerving stillness. "Then why is there sweat on your brow, Mr. Whitmore?" A dangerous glint appeared in Garrett's eyes. He was a man unaccustomed to being questioned, especially not from someone of her station. "You haven't the faintest idea about high finance," he said, his voice a low, hard growl, "or how the real world operates. Your job is to carry plates, and your job is to carry other people's money," Felicia countered. "The only question is if you're leading it to a safe harbor or straight into a blaze of your own making." From a secluded booth in the corner, Harold Brennan observed the exchange, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He had always recognized Felicia's rare talent. It seemed the rest of the room was finally about to catch on. Caroline shot to her feet. "I have to make a call." She was already moving toward the exit, her phone clamped to her ear. The pretense of ignoring the confrontation had vanished from the other tables. A wave of hushed chatter swept through the dining room. Sensing the narrative slipping from his grasp, Garrett made a desperate play. "All right, let's put this to bed right now." He jabbed a finger toward the CNBC broadcast on the wall. "Get Nexus on there. We'll see what the actual experts think." Philip, the restaurant manager, scrambled to turn up the sound. The screen showed Nexus's stock price holding firm. $142.50. Colored green, perfectly stable, completely normal. Garrett threw his arms wide in a triumphant gesture. "See? Nothing. You're completely full of..." He let the insult hang in the air. A surge of confidence washed over Garrett. The ticker was solid. The screen was his vindication. This server had just made a fool of herself in a room full of people who mattered. "As I was saying," he declared, his voice booming to capture the room's attention, "this is precisely what happens when amateurs step out of their lane and meddle in things far beyond their comprehension." He rose, fastening the button on his suit jacket as he prepared for the final verbal strike. "Let me educate you on the realities of the financial world, sweetheart," he said with a grand, dismissive wave of his hand. "I've closed deals worth more than you'll see in a lifetime, and that's just before my morning coffee. I've had the ear of presidents. I've shifted global markets with a single call. I built an empire from scratch." He took a step toward Felicia, looming over her. "And what do? You clear tables. You pour water. Your entire purpose is to serve men like me. That is the fundamental order of things. It's simply the way the world is constructed. And no amount of late-night Googling in your tiny, pathetic apartment will ever alter that reality. A couple of nervous laughs echoed in the room, but they were more scattered than before. The atmosphere in the room had changed, a detail that escaped Garrett entirely. "So, allow me to offer you some advice," he said, his voice practically oozing contempt. "Return to the kitchen, complete your duties, and never, ever make a public spectacle of yourself again." Felicia remained perfectly still. "Have you finished?" she asked. Garrett blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry?" "I asked," she repeated, "if you have finished, because now it's my turn to speak." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "Where did you get your degree?" Garrett demanded. "Some online community college, I presume?" "Let me guess, you watched a few YouTube tutorials on stock picking, and now you fancy yourself the next Warren Buffett." "Columbia," Felicia stated quietly. "Master of Business Administration, class of 2019. Graduated in the top 5%. A profound silence fell over the room. "Prove it," Garrett stammered. "Call them." But before he could say more, a clear voice cut through the quiet from the other side of the restaurant. "She's telling the truth." Harold Brennan got to his feet slowly at his corner table. His very presence seemed to command the room's focus. There was an unmistakable air of authority in his posture. "And who in the hell are you?" Garrett shot back. "Harold Brennan. I was the former chair of the finance department at NYU Stern and a consultant for the Federal Reserve from 2008 to 2015. He approached Garrett's table with a deliberate, unhurried pace. "Over the course of my career, I have mentored hundreds of financial analysts. The number I've met who possess a truly intuitive grasp of the markets can be counted on a single hand." He came to a stop right beside Felicia. "She is one of them." A fresh wave of murmurs washed over the diners. Many of them knew the name. In the world of finance, Harold Brennan was a living legend. Garrett's expression contorted with rage. "I don't give a damn if she has a doctorate from Harvard. A piece of paper doesn't mean she understands my specific operation." "He's right about that," Felicia agreed. "So let's discuss your operation in detail." She produced another piece of paper from her apron. "You've made 17 appearances on CNBC in the last 12 months to champion Nexus Technologies. Following every single appearance, the stock price surges. And within 48 hours of that surge, Whitmore Capital offloads a significant number of shares." She held the paper steady for him to see. "March 15th, a CNBC segment results in a 4% stock jump. March 17th, Whitmore Capital sells 200,000 shares. April 3rd, another segment. The stock climbs 3%. April 5th, you sell another 150,000 shares." She locked eyes with him. "This exact pattern has repeated itself 7 times. That isn't market analysis, Mr. Whitmore. That is a classic pump and dump scheme." The color drained from Garrett's face. "Those are routine rebalancing transactions," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "It's standard portfolio management. Rebalancing involves both buying and selling," Felicia countered. "In 8 months, you've only offloaded $52 million worth." Caroline had finished her call and returned just in time to hear him telling everyone to buy. She was stock still by the door, her eyes locked on Garrett, but the unease in her expression was gone, replaced by pure horror. "Is that true?" she demanded. "Garrett, please tell me she's lying." "It's slander," Garrett spat. "She's fabricating this whole thing. I'll sue her for everything she has." "On what grounds?" Felicia shot back, citing public SEC documents from memory. At another table, a man in his 60s who had been hanging on every word got to his feet. "I invested in Nexus on your word," the man said, his voice trembling. "That was my retirement fund. And you're telling me you were dumping your shares this entire time?" Garrett jabbed a finger toward Felicia. "This woman is a nobody. She's a bitter waitress with an axe to grind. Are you really going to take her word over mine?" "I'm going to take the SEC filings at their word," the man retorted. He sank back into his chair and immediately pulled out his phone. The atmosphere in the room was shattering, and Garrett could feel the ground giving way beneath him. His supporters were pulling back. His command of the room was evaporating. He tried one final, desperate gambit. Even if a single word of this were true, and it's not, it wouldn't make a difference. Come Friday, Nexus will hit 160. That stock is rock solid. The company is fundamentally sound. And as for you, he snarled, pointing directly at Felicia, you'll be on that chair, begging every single person in this room for forgiveness. Felicia simply cocked her head. That's a bold prediction. I never lose. Felicia gave a slow, deliberate nod. You know who else said those exact words? Every single person whose company you gutted on your climb to the top. The pension funds you pillaged. The small businesses you drove into the ground. They all believed they were invincible, too. Garrett's gaze hardened. Garrett started to form a retort, but before he could speak, a chorus of vibrations erupted as every phone in the room went off simultaneously. At Garrett's own table, the fund manager glanced at his screen. All the color drained from his face. Oh my God, he breathed. Every trading halted. The news anchor's voice sliced through the stunned silence. In a shocking turn of events, the Securities and Exchange Commission has just confirmed it is launching a full-scale investigation into Nexus Technologies, citing suspected accounting fraud and major securities violations. On the screen, the stock price was locked at $142.50, but it was a meaningless number. Everyone in that room knew instinctively that when the markets reopened, Nexus would be lucky to be worth half that amount, maybe not even a quarter. Felicia Turner's gaze fell upon Garrett Whitmore. Feeling data streamed across the ticker. Pundits materialized in tiny windows on the screen, their faces grim. It was all just noise. Everyone present understood the brutal reality of what had just unfolded. The Waitress had called it. At Garrett's table, the fund manager, the same one who had roared at his jokes and sunk $20 million into Nexus, shot to his feet, sending his chair clattering to the floor. I'm wiped out, he choked out, his voice fracturing. Completely wiped out. I bet the entire farm on Nexus because you swore it was a sure thing. Garrett's jaw worked, but nothing came out. This is just a coincidence, he finally stammered. The timing, it can't be. Is it? Felicia's tone was unnervingly calm, almost soft. I warned you to get out before Tuesday. Today's Saturday. That gave you 3 full days. But you decided to bet against me. Caroline Hayes strode toward them, phone still clutched in her hand. Her face was ashen, her expression like stone. This is a catastrophe, Garrett. Caroline, wait, please don't. She threw up a hand to stop him. Just don't. Garrett made a move toward her, but she recoiled as if he were carrying a plague. All the while, the phones kept ringing and buzzing relentlessly. Throughout, liquidate everything. What's our total exposure? Get me out of Nexus right now. A woman shot up from her chair, her face red with fury. I purchased 200,000 shares last month because you guaranteed it would double. My clients put their faith in your advice. Another man yelled across the room, we all trusted you. Garrett turned slowly on the spot, a spectator to his own implosion. The same people who had been roaring at his jokes just 5 minutes earlier now refused to meet his gaze. The colleagues who had showered him with praise for years were already creating a noticeable distance. Bradley, the senator's aide, was already on his phone, his voice a low, urgent hiss. The senator has to release a statement right now. We need total separation from Whitmore. No, he absolutely never endorsed a single investment. Yes, I get it. The senator's wife, meanwhile, had simply disappeared. As the room descended into chaos, Felicia Turner didn't move a muscle. Derek had appeared from the kitchen, his eyes locked on her as if she were a complete stranger. She nailed it, a voice announced, loud enough to silence the chatter. That waitress predicted it down to the minute. Another person demanded, who in the world is she? Harold Brennan, now back in his seat, watched Felicia with a surge of quiet pride. The protege he'd never formally mentored was validating every suspicion he'd ever had about her. Who are you? The question echoed from several corners of the room. How could you have known? Felicia's eyes swept over the sea of wealthy, powerful individuals who had spent 2 years either ignoring her or, even worse, actively belittling her. I'm the kind of person who pays attention to the fine print, she answered. She then redirected her focus to Garrett Whitmore, who was standing paralyzed in the epicenter of his imploding world. Our wager, she said plainly, was that Nexus would fail to stay above 150 by Friday. You owe $100,000 to programs that teach financial literacy. Garrett's features contorted into a mask of rage. This is far from over, he snarled. A flicker of a smile played on Felicia's lips. No, she agreed, it isn't. Garrett Whitmore had always been a survivor. His entire career was built on being ruthless, exploiting every angle, and never showing a hint of weakness. Even in this moment, with his core investment strategy falling apart on national television, his brain was frantically mapping out potential exits. He could deny everything, shift the blame to the SEC, get his lawyers on the phone, or threaten a lawsuit. He adjusted his tie, schooling his face into an expression of pure contempt. So what? You had a lucky guess on one call, he boomed, making sure everyone could hear him. The markets are unpredictable. This is meaningless. Nexus will bounce back by next week, and you'll be nothing but a footnote in a forgotten story. He tossed a wad of cash onto the table. We're done here, Philip. He snapped his fingers at the manager. Bring my car around. As he pivoted towards the door, Felicia's voice cut through the air, stopping him cold. We had an agreement, Mr. Whitmore. Nexus won't clear 150 by Friday. It won't even clear 50. Your debt of $100,000 to financial literacy programs stands. Garrett kept his back to her. Sue me, he challenged, taking another step. That won't be necessary, Felicia replied. The SEC will handle things much more severely. Garrett froze in his tracks. When he finally turned, he saw that Felicia's demeanor had shifted entirely. The composed, professional mask was gone. What replaced it was something far colder, far more resolute. You know what's truly fascinating, Mr. Whitmore? In all the years you've spent dismantling companies and wrecking lives, you never once took the time to learn the names of your victims. To you, they were just statistics, acceptable losses. Garrett's brow furrowed. What are you even talking about? Morrison Medical Supply, she stated, a small pharmaceutical distributor based in New Jersey. You staged a hostile takeover in 2018, drowned it in debt, siphoned off $40 million in management fees, and then let it die. 150 people were left without jobs. Their pensions were completely erased. For a fleeting second, a flicker of recognition crossed Garrett's face. Then it vanished. I've closed hundreds of deals. I can't be expected to recall every single. The CEO challenged you in court. He lost everything he had. 6 months later, he died from a heart attack. He was 54 years old. His name was Thomas Morrison. Felicia's voice never wavered. If anything, it grew even quieter, more intense. He was my uncle, my mother's brother. The room fell into a deafening silence. And my mother, Ruth Turner, was his partner in the business. She poured her life savings into Morrison Medical. Every single dollar she earned over 30 years of cleaning rooms in hotels. When you drove the company into bankruptcy, you destroyed her financially. Felicia moved a step closer to Garrett. 6 months after my uncle passed away, she suffered a stroke. The doctors concluded it was brought on by stress. It took her ability to walk, her ability to earn a living, and it nearly stole her voice. She took another deliberate step. I walked away from my position at Goldman Sachs to become her full-time caregiver. I sacrificed everything, my entire career, all my savings, my whole future, all of it gone because of what you did. And for the last 3 years, I've served you Eggs Benedict every Saturday morning while you held court about your deals, just 3 feet away from me. She was right in his face now, close enough to see the sweat glistening on his forehead. Not once did you ever truly look at me. Never once did it cross your mind to wonder who I might be. The color drained from Garrett's face, leaving it the shade of aged parchment. That's just how business works. I had no idea. That's precisely the issue. Felicia's voice was as steady and hard as granite. You never have any idea. You never bother to care. To you, we are just numbers. We're collateral damage. We're the people who simply don't count. She scanned the room, her eyes meeting the stunned gazes of the wealthy patrons. But every one of those numbers has a name. Every one of those names has a family. And every now and then, those families don't forget. Caroline Hayes covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Garrett, you ruined her entire family." Garrett's jaw worked, but no words came out. It was quite possibly the first time in his entire life that he was utterly speechless. Felicia took a step back. "You came to me asking for financial guidance, Mr. Whitmore. You said you wanted me to educate you about money." A smile stretched across her face, but it held no warmth, only ice. The first lesson of the night: arrogance, like everything else, comes with a price tag. A jolt of pure survival instinct finally shot through Garrett. This was a trap. His words came out strained, a slight crack in his voice, but he forced them out. "This was all a setup. You planned this whole charade, the bet, the questions, all of it. I'm calling the cops." "On what grounds?" A voice cut through the tension from across the dining room. "For answering a question you asked?" A woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, rose from a corner table, a press pass hanging conspicuously around her neck. "My name is Sarah Wade, from the New York Times. I've spent the last 18 months digging into Whitmore Capital." The color drained from Garrett's face. "Felicia has been feeding me information," Sarah announced, her heels clicking as she advanced toward the middle of the room. "A year ago, she came to me with proof you might be committing securities fraud. Every single thing she laid out here tonight, the pump and dump, the insider trading, the cooked books. I've confirmed it all through my own independent sources." She then lifted her phone, holding it high for everyone to see. "That SEC investigation that just hit the news? My piece on it goes live on the front page Monday morning. And thanks to you, this whole scene just became my lead." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the room. Garrett's hand trembled as he jabbed a finger in Felicia's direction. This was your plan all along," he stammered. Felicia held his gaze, her expression unshakable. "Your goal was to swindle millions of people. My goal was to bring you down. I guess we both had a plan." 2 years? Garrett choked out. "You spent 2 whole years working here just watching, listening, building a case?" Felicia simply nodded. "Every Saturday, you discussed your illegal schemes not 3 feet from where I stood. You didn't notice because to you, people like me don't even register. To men like you, we're just part of the background. And that," she added with a slight pause, "was your biggest miscalculation." Garrett's allies were already melting into the shadows. The fund managers had vanished. The tech CEO took advantage of the chaos and slipped out unnoticed. Bradley, the senator's aide, was already halfway to the exit, his phone glued to his ear, no doubt spinning a narrative to insulate his boss from the fallout. "Mr. Whitmore," Bradley called over his shoulder, never breaking stride. "Expect a formal statement from the senator's office. He has a vague recollection of meeting you. He has never, under any circumstances, endorsed your financial strategies. Do not attempt to contact us." The door clicked shut behind him. And just like that, Garrett was alone. 5 minutes earlier, he had been the king of this room, the untouchable titan who belittled a waitress for fun. Now he was a ghost, deserted by the very sycophants who had been laughing at his jokes moments before. Caroline Hayes walked toward him, her steps measured. "I actually believed in you," she said, her voice low. "When everyone called you ruthless, I told them you were just driven. I mistook your cruelty for a competitive edge." She shook her head in disgust. "But this, financially ruining a family and then getting a thrill from taunting their daughter as she pours your champagne? That isn't business, Garrett. It's pure evil." Without another word, she turned her back on him. The confident facade Garrett had worn for years finally shattered. his face twisting in a snarl of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this," he yelled, his voice climbing in pitch. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who I am?" "I do," Felicia replied, her tone even. "You're the man who just had his entire world dismantled in a restaurant, with a waitress as the architect." She turned and headed for the exit. "Oh, one more thing, Mr. Whitmore," she said, glancing back. "I wouldn't bother making reservations for next week's brunch. Your standing invitation has been revoked." As she walked away, she untied her apron, folded it with care, and laid it on an empty table. A final, silent resignation. Derek intercepted her just before the door. "Felicia," he stared at her as if seeing her for the very first time. "Who are you, really?" A genuine smile finally touched her lips, weary but real. "I'm just a daughter who came to settle an old score for her mother." Harold Brennan was waiting for her right at the doorway. He clasped her hand warmly between both of his. "Your uncle would be beaming," he said softly. "And your mother, she'd be so proud." A sheen of tears formed in Felicia's eyes, but she held them back. "Not now. I have to go see her," she whispered. "I need to tell her it's over." Then she stepped out into the bright Manhattan sun, leaving Garrett Whitmore to stand alone amidst the ruins of the empire he built. The woman no one ever noticed was suddenly the only person anyone could see. That night, a video surfaced online. A diner had captured the entire takedown. It showed it all. The public shaming, the brilliant analysis, the shocking reveal, and the catastrophic downfall. In just 3 hours, it hit 5 million views. By the 12-hour mark, 50 million. A hashtag emerged from the chaos. Waitress versus Billionaire. That was followed by Justice for Morrison, hashtag Felicia Turner, and hashtag Read the Footnotes. Before the weekend was over, Felicia's face was being broadcast on every news network in America. The headlines were instantaneous. Waitress topples billionaire using his own SEC filings. The server who called the Nexus crash right to his face. Garrett Whitmore's downfall. How one Harlem woman dismantled Wall Street's largest fraud. Then, on Monday morning, Sarah Wade's story broke. It was the front page lead in the New York Times. The waitress, the billionaire, and the fraud. Inside Whitmore Capital's House of Cards. The article laid out every sordid detail. The pump and dump operations, the rampant insider trading, and a trail of financial devastation that went back for decades. Morrison Medical Supply was merely the latest casualty in a long line of dozens of companies Garrett had bled dry. Uncountable careers were obliterated. Entire pension funds vanished into thin air. Lives were left in ruins by a man who had never faced a single repercussion for his actions. Until this moment. When trading began on Monday, Nexus Technologies plummeted to $31 a share, a catastrophic 78% collapse. Every investor who had put their faith in Garrett's guidance was completely wiped out. Within 48 hours, Whitmore Capital was hit with $2.3 billion in redemption demands. Clients stampeded for the exits, while partners abandoned the sinking ship. The indictment listed a trifecta of financial crimes: securities fraud, wire fraud, and market manipulation. His booking photo was soon splashed across every major network. The titan known for his $15,000 suits and for casually waving $100 bills at waitstaff was now clad in an orange jumpsuit, reduced to an inmate number. Bail was set at an ironic $50 million, the exact figure he had once boasted about to Felicia. Just the number of plaintiffs began at 200, quickly ballooned to 500, and ultimately swelled to over 1,000. A resolution came with surprising speed, a $52 million settlement for the employees and families he had devastated. Felicia's testimony during the preliminary hearing was spellbinding. When she concluded, a profound silence had fallen over the courtroom. Several members of the jury were openly weeping. During the press conference that followed, a journalist called out, "What is your message to other corporate predators?" Felicia considered the question for a moment. "There is always someone watching," she declared. The first call came from Goldman Sachs. They were keen to talk about her comeback to the financial world. They offered a senior analyst role, a corner office, and a salary that was open to negotiation. Morgan Stanley was next. JP Morgan followed, then CNBC pitched a regular contributor segment. Netflix even inquired about optioning her life story for a new limited series. Felicia turned down every last one of them. She instead took her portion of the settlement funds, along with the continuous income from speaking fees and paid interviews, to establish the Morrison Financial Literacy Center in Newark, New Jersey. It provided complimentary classes, free materials, and crucial financial knowledge for anyone who had been led to believe that money was a subject too complex for them to ever master. The center's grand opening attracted a crowd of 200, including local media, state officials, and Caroline Hayes, who had become a major donor to the center after her departure from Whitmore Capital. "You fundamentally shifted my perspective back in that restaurant," Caroline admitted to Felicia. "Allow me to help you do the same for others." Harold Brennan signed on to be the center's volunteer advisor. At 72 years old, he finally had the sense that he was instructing students who were desperate for his knowledge. But the victory that meant the most to Felicia happened quietly, away from any cameras. She went to visit her mother in their Harlem apartment the very evening that Garrett was taken into custody. Ruth was propped up in bed, her gaze locked on the news, with tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Felicia sat down beside her, taking her hand. "I'm no hero, Mom. I'm just a person who cared about her family enough to learn how to fight." Ruth's fingers tightened around her daughter's. "Tommy, your uncle. He always said," Felicia's voice faltered. "I know. He said that men like Whitmore are untouchable, that they're just too powerful to ever fail." She reached into her bag and retrieved a photograph of Thomas Morrison. It was taken on the day Morrison Medical Supply first opened, showing him surrounded by hopeful, smiling employees. Felicia placed it on her mother's nightstand. "He was wrong, Mom. We proved him wrong." Through her tears, Ruth gave a smile, the first genuine one Felicia had seen in 3 years. "He can be at peace now," Felicia whispered, "and so can you." Half a year later, the Morrison Financial Literacy Center was being celebrated nationally for its work in underserved communities. The enrollment waitlist stretched to include hundreds of names. One afternoon following a workshop, a young woman cautiously made her way toward Felicia. She was 19, visibly anxious, and holding a sleeping baby. "Miss Turner, I'm a single mother. I juggle 2 jobs. I have never been able to make sense of any of this money stuff. Everyone has always made me feel so dumb for even trying to ask." She wavered for a second. "Can you really teach somebody like me?" Felicia's face broke into a warm smile. "Somebody like you is precisely why this place is here. What's your name?" "Destiny." "Okay, Destiny, here's your first lesson." Felicia leaned in closer. "Never, ever let anyone persuade you that money is too difficult for you to grasp. That is a lie that the wealthy tell to stop you from asking questions. And asking questions is your first step in fighting back." A spark of excitement flashed in Destiny's eyes as Felicia leaned in and said, "All right, let's begin at the start." But the story doesn't end there. 6 months after his sentencing, Garrett Whitmore found himself sitting in the stark silence of a federal prison cell. 15 years, the judge had ordered, without a chance of parole. A prison guard unceremoniously dropped a package on his cot, a padded mailer that had already been torn open and searched. Tucked inside was a fresh copy of the Wall Street Journal, featuring a front-page headline that read, "Morrison Financial Literacy Center earns national acclaim." Slipped underneath the newspaper was a simple note, handwritten on a plain piece of white paper. It contained only 2 words, "Still teaching." Signed, F. For a long while, Garrett just stared at it. Eventually, he fell back onto the thin mattress, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, trapped with nothing but the silence and the crushing reality of all he had lost. He had tried to humiliate a waitress by asking for her financial opinion. He really should have listened, because often the sharpest person in the room is the one you never even notice. And sometimes the very people you dismiss are the ones paying the closest attention. If Felicia's journey resonated with you, subscribe to see more tales about the underdogs who fought to be seen. Go ahead and ring that notification bell and share this with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth today. Always remember, your situation is not a measure of your mind. Your job title isn't your life story. And the person who serves you coffee could very well be the next person to change everything. Don't ever underestimate a single soul. You don't know who's observing. You don't know who's biding their time. And you certainly don't know who is about to make their move.